Watching daily very, very right there. Trying to
Yeah, we're not.
even though you're not well, yeah, that's all that I think. It's funny.
That's the kind of buying.
Right. Yeah. Even before
Okay.
oh, wow. They're all long as you want to later, the later might be what you didn't get that. Yeah, I write to the yeah, and then there are strange inside. I'm not every finding strange concept only it's still information. And you have to go too low. You're sure about it. So it's better than we got way up there. And that's that. It's a very window. Yes.
All right, folks, welcome back to our 3 o'clock online keynote, which will be streamed here, Wizard of Oz style, on the big screen. You're also welcome to join the webinar from a device if you'd prefer. I'm so excited to introduce our speaker for our virtual plenary, Anna Mills, who's going to give a talk for us towards transparency. How can we distinguish AI from human text going forward? Anna Mills teaches writing at the College of Marin and previously taught at City College of San Francisco for 17 years. Her collection, AI Text Generators and Teaching Writing, Starting Points for Inquiry, is featured in the Writing Across Curriculum Clearinghouse. It includes a curated collection of articles, a set of sample AI essays, and a list of strategies for mitigating educational harms associated with large language models. She's also written an open educational resource textbook, How Arguments Work, a guide to writing and analyzing texts in college, which has been used at over 45 colleges. Anna's essays have appeared in journals such as Inside Higher Ed, The Writers Chronicle, and The Sun. I'm really excited to hear how Anna's going to help us connect the discussions we've already been having today, how to incorporate care and even gamification in our goals and our values for writing. And then also remembering that, you know, AI is not necessarily human text, and we still probably need to know what it looks like. So thank you so much. Take it away, Anna.
Thank you. It's been amazing to be at this event and to see other speakers. So much to process. So I want to focus on this idea of transparency and be maybe a
one
little
second,
bit.
Anna. We can't hear you in the room, so we're going to start that.
Okay.
Up.
Okay, you're muted now for me. Can you hear me? Okay, awesome. Okay, so I want to focus today on this idea of transparency. Mahabali spoke a bit about transparency of assessment with AI this morning, and I think I'm going to be a little bit more provocative and maybe more controversial. My own ideas on this are not fixed. It's definitely something I've been wrestling with for a good while, and I don't claim to have the answers, but it seems important. So feel free to ask questions in the Q&A or in the chat as we go, and I'll pause from time to time. The slides are open for commenting in the chat and on Discord. So just a basic outline. I want to look at reasons we might want to distinguish AI writing from human writing, and then ask how might we do that, even without any kind of technical fix or software. Then look at, okay, is classification software, is detection software evil? What might be its uses, and how might we move forward with or without it? Preserving some hope for transparency around what is AI and what is human. So I just take as a really basic starting point kind of the idea that ChatGPT running GPT-4 can at least a good chunk of the time sort of pass a Turing test. It's coming up with prose on many different kinds of prompts that's not copied verbatim. It's giving different results each time, even with the same prompt. Flexible, somewhat flexible, at least on genre and style, and often sounds plausible. So with that starting point, are there settings, are there situations where we really want to know if text is AI generated, right? So in the picture here, there's one fake avocado and one real one. In that case, obviously we need to know, but what about text? So I want to kind of start this discussion. I think a lot of the discussions about this in higher ed that I've been a part of have focused on academic integrity and sort of picked up on these polarized debates about plagiarism detection, Turnitin, and the idea of policing. But I want to kind of back up and look at transparency more broadly in society as well, and just think about when would we want to know when something is AI, in other social contexts where we might want to know. And those, what we need for society may inform what we have available and what we want to use in education. So we can imagine there'd be different categories here. There's some things we don't want to see auto-generated. There are some things that might be okay in some circumstances, but we want to know what's AI and what's not. Some things it's totally fine to use AI, but it should be labeled. And some things maybe we really don't care if it's AI or not. So I just thought, backing up really far, looking at the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights that was released by the Biden White House, it's interesting that in some settings, there's this really clear message that we should know, and we have a right to know what is coming from an AI and what's coming from a human. And they have this unequivocal message in that blueprint. You should know that an automated system is being used and understand how and why it contributes to outcomes that impact you. So if we consider that text impacts us, then that would imply that we have a right to know when an automated system has been used. So I want to kind of jump in and have folks explore this on Mentimeter. I've given a couple of different contexts or situations where we want to know, like, would you care if it's AI or not? So you can go to menti.com, enter 64501889, or you can use the QR code. And I'll throw the link in the chat as well in a second. Okay. So yeah, the link is in the chat now. And there are actually 2 slides. So once you do the first one, you can go on to the next question, and it's just more situations. Would you care if a student essay was AI generated or not? How about a discussion post? How about a reflection on their writing? The cover letter that talks about their writing process. How about the peer review paragraph they're writing about another student's work? An admissions essay. And okay, and then backing up from academia, a news article, an opinion piece, a scholarly article. Do we need to know? Yeah, and I should clarify, strongly agree would be that it's important to know. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for jumping in there. Wow, I'm surprised people are more on the strongly agree side than the disagree side. I've heard a lot of, people kind of throwing up their hands and going, let's just accept that we're not going to know. So that's interesting that everything's above a 3 here. Folks want to know. And the highest is the student reflection on their work. Maybe that feels like the most intimate in a way, because it's using the I. Okay. And if we go to the second slide, have folks gotten to do that one yet? These are more personal social settings. Well, that's really fascinating. So it seems like it's less important to folks in the social settings or the personal category, if I can go by the averages so far. An email from a colleague, you don't mind if it's, well, it's about smack in the middle there for an email from a colleague. an email from a friend. I'm going, yikes, if this is AI generated, then how do I know if the person actually has the same intentions or the same tone, the same set of feelings that are implied by the tone? Whether that's a friend or a colleague, an email from a stranger you're not worried about targeted phishing attempts from strangers commenting on your blog post, social media posts. Well, this is fascinating. If anyone wants to jump in as to why, that's totally the opposite of what I expected. People are high on the wanting to know in the academic settings and in the publication settings, but it looks like, except for the doctor or therapist notes, these are all, oh, maybe the email from a friend also is a little above average, that people are a little more on the wanting to know side. But not social media, not texts from an acquaintance. That's really fascinating. Okay, so if we ignore emails from strangers, that's fine. But say it's somebody reaching out to you based on your professional role and trying to make a connection, etc. Yeah, fiction, memoir, only sort of medium agree want to know. Okay. So I'm going to hold on to that thought. Maybe we'll come back to that poll. But I wanted to look at, to sort of bring out what might be some of the reasons we would want to know, and sort of see which are compelling to you. So, I mean, I think for me, I'm going with this idea of relationship and human communication. And yeah, I was just in a class and I was wondering if some of my classmates were possibly using AI to generate discussion posts, and it was just disheartening, thinking, well, I don't want to spend my energy responding to them if that's ChatGPT, and trying to build community here. So we might want to know, just to sort of preserve both the reality of knowing that you're interacting with another person, and to preserve the possibility of the text being viewed as genuine, right? Like to exclude that possibility, that that doubt in some settings, that we wouldn't have to wonder if something was AI or not. Another reason is to screen out a flood of, say, cheaply produced, highly customized content like spam, disinformation that's tailored. Maybe to flag something, as somebody said in the chat, citing our sources. So if we flag it as AI, that gives us some information about potential for bias and inaccuracies, fabrications, things like that. Just to get more information about what shaped the text, to recognize that unknown authors contributed to the content, so that, of course, these models have statistically analyzed human texts. And so anything that they put out is sort of averaged, an averaged version of those human texts. And then finally, I'm bringing us back to education, to assess student learning, to know what it is students are thinking and understanding in our classrooms. So just to zero in on one of those, the idea of the flood, I love the phrase textpocalypse that Matthew Kirschenbaum coined in his piece, Prepare for the Textpocalypse, in The Atlantic, early March. And he's sort of saying, what if we're done in by simple, plain, unadorned text, a tsunami of text swept into a self-perpetuating cataract of content that makes it functionally impossible to reliably communicate in any digital setting. And he calls it a debilitating amalgamation of human and machine authorship, an ongoing planetary spam event. So the idea that that would compromise human communication. And that was really echoed today when sort of AI godfather, Jeffrey Hinton, he's been called godfather, sort of publicly left Google, saying that he's not comfortable with where AI is right now, and warning of something very like that textpocalypse. The New York Times reported that his immediate concern is that the internet will be flooded with false photos, videos, and text, and the average person will not be able to know what is true anymore. So alongside that, I think there's this concern about the human sources that I mentioned, who contributed to the text that this language model was trained on. So if we don't recognize that something is AI, we're not recognizing that there are human sources behind it. And then even if we recognize it as AI, those people might want to be recognized further. And I thought it was interesting, this piece in the New Yorker by John Jaron, I think I have that wrong, I have to fix that. Lanier, There Is No AI. He's really bringing out this idea of data dignity, of giving credit to the people whose writing and data have informed software. So some further transparency might be important to that. And then again, the idea of building human relationship. If we're using email, texting, to build a relationship, that only works if we know that we're actually interacting between humans. And so funny example of that, somebody posted on Reddit, is this ethical? I made a dating app bot to get dates and it actually works. And Ryan T. Brown on Twitter answered, to answer whether it's ethical, no. So these people are not aware they're talking to a robot. And you can see very vividly in the dating app example that something's broken there. Like, you're going to the dating app to establish a relationship, right? And if the text is not coming from a person, then how are you establishing a relationship with that person? So moving on to the academic context, I think that the relationship idea is a part of that. Certainly, relationship between teachers and students, or students and students, is compromised if we don't know when something is AI or not in our communications. But also, how can we know if students are learning, and how can we know what they actually think of our assessments if we can't distinguish AI text from their writing? And I would argue that even if we're not focused on grading, even if we're using ungrading approaches, we're still assessing some baseline competence, right? There's still they've learned something or they haven't, kind of question that we have to answer. And here's where, I've heard a lot of folks talking about embracing student use of AI, and teachers embracing it, and sort of, if it's inevitable, then why not see the good in it? Why not play with it? And I find that really compelling and exciting. And I sort of like to be contrarian and push back as well. So, I mean, even if we're embracing it, often that means asking students to comment on it, to improve on ChatGPT outputs. And if there's any role for the student, if the student is doing anything active, then we need to know what that student is doing, which part is the student's and which is the AI, right? And that might seem kind of relatively more simple now when ChatGPT is its own platform. But as I think Maha mentioned with AutoGPT plugins, and we can kind of see where this is going by, if you have a Grammarly, I use the Grammarly extension in my browser. So whatever text field I'm in, I have the Grammarly overlay in there. I have it accessible. And it's pretty clear that's going to be the case unless there's some ban on it, that text generation will be accessible wherever we are writing. So how will we maintain that distinction between when is the student commenting on the AI and when are they using the AI? So just to show what that might look like, one thing that I've been playing with is a module on Canvas Commons, an activity where students compare a student-written sample essay to a ChatGPT session that's working on generating an essay, and they reflect on the differences and they annotate both the human and the ChatGPT essays. And what I realized is that that's what it looks like in Canvas Commons. Sorry, it's going to launch that page. But what I realized is that even if I'm using the Hypothesis social annotation software, so students are using this, they're highlighting, I'm all set up with the Share GPT is the extension I use with ChatGPT, and that creates a web page that has a whole record of the chat session. And so I have students annotating the chat session with that. And what I realized is, and then there's a text box there in the Hypothesis in the browser, and it would be so easy to have an extension that they have a plugin there that they can then say, well, what would ChatGPT say about this, right? Sort of the ChatGPT on ChatGPT phenomenon, right? It can comment on itself, it can revise itself, it can go from an outline to a draft of its own, right? So, so anything that we're going to ask students to do in response to ChatGPT can also be then completed by ChatGPT. So I want to pause again for a little more Mentimeter, but this is a different link. So let me get that in a second. I guess I should leave up the QR code. So if you want to, I'll hold that up for a minute so you have the QR code. So, and this is just open-ended. If you sometimes want to know why and what reason to you is most compelling, it might be something I haven't mentioned at all, which would be good to know. So put this link in the chat. Yeah, there's the second one. Let's see if I can get it to display. Doesn't seem to want to display my answers, but I will get it. Your answers, rather. Here we go. At last. Integrity of the written word. That's really interesting. Jeremy Douglas was using the phrase authenticity, I believe, and talking about a circuit of authenticity, which I thought was a neat kind of contradiction, right? I'm thinking of computer circuits, but sort of a sense of integrity about sources is this next answer. I'm the reader who checks the footnotes. Yes. I want my students to develop their own voice. They can't do that if they don't struggle through the process. Yes, it's hard to even know what a voice is, and to try out different voices and to have an intuition about which one, what resonates. I don't want to extend care to a chatbot. Absolutely, neither do I. I don't want to waste my energy. AI is not an audience. Also, I want to know how much emotional and intellectual energy to invest. Challenging students' authentic voices too often with questioning if they use AI will be adding additional stress. Yeah, I'm also concerned about that. Originality, authenticity. Okay, making sure that students are going through the rhetorical decision-making process. So reflection writing in particular, factual source information is difficult. I do not like being deceived. Yeah, absolutely. It kind of is, it goes to that on that basic level. To know if our conversation is authentic and intimate or mediated via machine. To know if and what students are learning. Assessing true intellectual curiosity and inquiry. When literariness matters. Oh, I'm curious about that one. Cool. So, all right. So I'm going to move ahead, assuming that we do sometimes want to distinguish AI from human text. How might we do that? A lot of different ways. Maybe we can, I think I skipped a slide. It might be futile. Is it futile? I've seen people I really respect and admire arguing that it is. Dr. Sarah Lane Eaton, who's an expert on academic integrity and AI, has just said flat out, trying to determine where the human ends and where the artificial intelligence begins. And she's talking about in future as hybrid writing becomes the norm, is pointless and futile, right? So I'm struggling with that. And Mahabali wrote a wonderful piece in response to that, also wrestling with it. So, okay, I'm going to push back though, because I'm not ready for that. And I don't want to believe that. And I'm not convinced yet that that is absolutely the case, that it's just all futile and we have to give up on text as human communication, and preserving a space for that. So the other thing I've heard a lot is maybe we can tell that it's AI, maybe that intuitively and just by the features of the text, we can still kind of tell. Maybe we can either decide to trust or cultivate trust in by our teaching practices so that we can have transparency without policing. And, you know, on the other side, maybe we just ask people to write without AI and we deny access to AI and thus create this space where we know it's human. And of course, that is problematic in various ways that I'll touch on. But this idea that we can tell, use our noses to tell if it's AI. My friend Lauren Goodlad, who's an amazing critic on AI, runs the Critical AI Institute at Rutgers. She and I have this conversation all the time, and she says that right now she's pretty confident she can tell if her students are using it, given the tells of the prose. And she's referring to the both sidesy summaries of argument without specific evidence, overuse of transitional statements such as in conclusion, lots of repetition, short paragraphs that schematize an argument without actually showing anything, lots of tell, no show. And Mahabali was agreeing with that, saying it was too strictly organized like a formula, which I thought was interesting. So I'm going like, okay, maybe, yeah, I do recognize those features. I've seen those things in ChatGPT output quite a bit. but I'm not as confident that I can always tell. In reading student research papers, I was running up against, okay, this paragraph reads kind of like it could be AI, but honestly, it could also be my student. As a number of people have commented, you know, if we're asking students to write and practice sort of an academic style that sometimes is somewhat formulaic. If you think of research papers in the sciences, the style itself is somewhat formulaic. Can we really tell? And how much of the time for how long? So we're not probably at the end point. And even if we could tell right now, why would we be sure that language models will stay this generic or bland or superficial? Certainly we know right now we can, as Jeremy Douglas described, we can ask the models to take on different personas, and we can ask them to be more original, voicier, to give more examples, to not use in conclusion, right? We can tell them all these things. And I think the results are somewhat mixed. Like, I haven't seen it generate writing that has a sort of a believable level and patterns of error to sort of developing student writing yet. But I imagine that just based on data, it might well get there in the next round, where it could imitate an individual student's style. If they give it a couple of papers that they did write, it could sort of replicate that style, because that's what it's designed to do. So I'm not convinced that that we can trust our noses. You know, there may be a role for that, and we can be in the moment, but I'm not convinced that's really a reliable approach. So what about trust and motivation-based approaches? And that's certainly what I've been advocating as a first line. You know, of course, we want to make our courses meaningful. We want the writing experience to be meaningful, intrinsically motivating. We can certainly communicate more of why we're assigning writing and what students will get out of the process, what we get out of the process. I love this statement from the Association for Writing Across the Curriculum that writing is a mode of learning. Students develop understanding and insights through the act of writing. And of course, we know that can be a hard sell when writing can be painful. And I share that a lot with my students, like how hard it is for me and how frustrating. But certainly sharing with them and sort of designing pedagogy to emphasize the rewards of writing, the deep learning and cognitive development that come with it, could help to deter any misuse. Emphasizing the purpose of every assignment, engagement, allowing for student choice, real world impact assignments. Those are all sort of approaches that are already things that we're trying to do as writing teachers. And certainly we can also go with sort of developing an ethic of transparency with students, that's voluntary and trust-based. We can consider sort of having an open discussion at the beginning of the course and asking, do students want to know, like as I asked on the Mentimeter, when do they want to know that something is AI and when it's not? And when might they think it's appropriate or helpful to their learning, and when would they be losing an important learning experience by using it? What guidelines would they see as important for the class? What values are at play? So I think like seeking student collaboration, informing policy, and moving toward a new ethic around transparency could be quite powerful. And I love the way Mahabali talks about this ethic of transparency. For her, it includes opportunities for metacognition around use of AI. She talks about inviting students to use AI, but also to reflect on how they're using it, why it was helpful or not, why it needed tweaking. That disclosure is part of it, but it's not just about you have to tell me if you use it, or it's not at all in that tone for her, right? It's more in the tone of, okay, let's notice when we're using it and when we're not, partly because that helps us think about our own thinking process, what we want it to do in the assignment, what we're getting from the AI, what's wrong, where we want to take it, right? So, so having that transparency be part of a kind of a larger metacognitive practice around any use of AI that has learning benefits of its own. So yes, I do think that trust is a powerful path, and probably the main path that I would pursue right now. It might suffice in many situations in the classroom and beyond. But I'm also skeptical that it really is going to work to sort of prevent the textpocalypse. And, you know, what about these other situations where we really can't look to trust to stop customized phishing or disinformation campaigns, or, you know, the gaming of Amazon reviews. So, and even in the classroom, in certain kinds of classes, you know, I heard the story of an anatomy professor who had a writing assessment, but had a class of 200 and just said, you know, too many of my students are, they're trying to pass a nursing exam. They're under huge pressure. They're often returning students with family responsibilities, and you know, the competitive pressures on them are too intense just to get through the class with a certain score, especially if they think their classmates are using ChatGPT. And so there may be cases in education as well where the incentives and the competitive pressures are so intense that students may not feel that trust is enough. So what do we do if trust is not enough? You know, the other approach that we hear a lot of is, well, then back to blue books, proctored in-class writing or writing by hand, writing in test centers, proctorio surveillance software, right? Or blocking AI on a network. These are certainly things that have been tried or suggested. They bring up a lot of concerns about equity, surveillance, accuracy of software like that, barriers for people with anxiety and disabilities around writing by hand or in-class writing. And just simply for in-class writing, it's just not enough time to develop a longer piece of writing that expresses a complex, longer developed thought. It's not enough time to carry out the whole writing process on a 6 to 8 page paper. So I would say maybe for some formative purposes, we can certainly look at having some in-class writing, kind of a flipped classroom approach where have them write in class, and then you kind of know that's their writing, that's not AI, and then you have some sense of their voice or style from that. But then they're also doing out of class writing, etc. So I would see these approaches as pretty, either their downsides are too strong, as with surveillance, which has been shown to be biased against people of color, and also invasive of their home environments. So I'm not seeing a lot of solutions here. That is why I am moving on. Let me check the chat and pause though. Yeah, you're paying so much for this class and you're going to let ChatGPT have the learning experience. Right. That's pretty critical. We don't know. They might be going to it sort of out of desperation, right? But still, like, emphasizing the value of the learning experience for sure. Okay, so I'm not seeing any big questions, but somebody jump in if I missed any. I was going to go on to detectors. AI text classification is sort of a less loaded way to refer to these. Is this, first of all, are they any good? And then second of all, would we want to use them? So on the are they any good question, can software check if text is AI generated? Well, there are a lot of software packages that are designed to do just that, at least to classify something as likely AI, but they are not reliable and they're not, as I understand it, expected to become reliable is sort of the 2-second version. So first, I've been surprised by some folks using ChatGPT itself and sort of asking it if it wrote something. So I just wanted to put in the caveat that, that kind of reveals how easy it is to slip into this misunderstanding of what a language model is, and that it doesn't know if it wrote something. It's not a coherent entity in itself. It doesn't have a database of what it's produced before. It hasn't been designed to classify text as AI or tested for that purpose, but it will give you an answer. It is designed to give you an answer. It just might not have anything to do with reality, right? So setting that aside, clearly we don't want to rehash all the debates about plagiarism detection software. So we can sort of say some of the debates are the same around, are we creating an adversarial relationship? What about student data going to the detection tool? But what's different is that we don't have access to a direct comparison of student work to some, list of AI text outputs. So it's based on these probabilistic guesses. And there've been shown to be many ways to tweak the text to evade detection. And this is just a quote from the MIT Technology Review recent article, just quoting a computer scientist saying we're extremely unlikely to ever get 100% certainty here in these tools, but here they are. Turnitin just released one on April 4th, as you may have heard, and there are these myriad others. There's Zero GPT and GPT-0, confusingly enough. And I'm going to focus a bit on Turnitin because it's so high profile and already built into systems that many teachers are using. They claim to have a less than 1 out of 100 false positive rate, meaning that, that false positive is labeling actual student writing as AI. So they're claiming this what sounds like high accuracy, but they haven't shared any data to back that up, let alone anything externally peer reviewed, and they haven't tested their system on GPT-4. And already the Washington Post found an example of a false positive from this Turnitin detector, where it flagged an innocent student. And other examples, I think it's kind of fun to see what these detectors will label as likely AI. So here, the Bill of Rights, I saw this anecdote and I was like, let me test that. And yeah, still thinks it's likely AI. And lots of other things, the opening to Macbeth, bits of the Constitution, right? So these are not reliable tools, but what does that mean for students? False accusations, that's a very serious risk. And even the threat of false accusations is something that could add to students' stress, right? So just notably, Turnitin has a sort of a FAQ for students to help them prepare for the possibility of a false accusation from their teacher based on their writing being flagged as AI. So turn it in. One of the pieces of advice is saying to students, establish your voice. Make sure that your writing style and voice are evident to your instructor. And that just seems kind of outrageous to me for students who are very low confidence, who don't yet understand what is meant by writing style or voice, let alone know what their own voice is. And what about, how would they know how the instructor would perceive it? And what kind of stress is that going to create if there's a divide in privilege and background between the student and the instructor? If they're thinking, okay, how do I have to write so that this teacher thinks that I'm a human? It's kind of a reverse Turing test. That seems like a huge amount of pressure on students. And also as AI gets quote unquote voicier, was the phrase from Sam Bowman, a computer scientist from NYU. You know, as future models sort of get more capable of varieties of voice, this may not even work as a way to prevent flagging. And then there's the monetary issue. So certainly these detectors want to charge if they're integrated into learning management systems. Turnitin is free for now, but it's planning to charge in January 2024. So is that a good use of money given this kind of inaccuracy? I think it's interesting that even Turnitin basically says that their prediction can't be used as evidence to penalize the student. If the student denies that it's AI, and you have conversations with the student, and then even Turnitin says the student cannot be penalized if they're saying that they wrote it. So you can see packed in there that there's a lot of sort of equity concerns about how are teachers going to interact with students around that AI flag, and who's going to be flagged, and also how are we going to do all these conferences where we assess whether the AI flag is correct or not, time-wise. But I think it's interesting that even Turnitin is suggesting that maybe this shouldn't be, that we shouldn't be looking to penalize using the detector, that might not be the outcome that that this is even for. So important to note that it's like super easy to beat the detectors right now using paraphrase software like Quillbot. As reported in the Washington Post. So if you sort of mix up the text, or even if you kind of prompt it skillfully and you know, ask it to do things that are unusual, then even ChatGPT direct output might not statistically look like the detector is expecting. So it's pretty simple to get around these at this point. And even this site undetectable.ai is sort of explicitly created to get around them. It tests text against various detectors. It says, type in the text you want to humanize. Lovely, right? So, you know, detection has a lot of downsides, a lot of ways it could be misused. But I'm not convinced it's time to give up on it. And this is where, you know, maybe you folks will push back. Matthew Kirschenbaum was calling on us to embrace the text apocalypse. And, you know, some of these wonderful thinkers on these topics on Twitter, Anuj Gupta says, yes, it's a battle that can't be won. So I suppose we just have to accept it. I'm just not ready for that, for all the reasons we've looked at, thinking of all the other situations where we want to know if the text is human or AI. And to me, the parallel is cybersecurity. So we know cybersecurity is never going to be perfect, and it's going to be an arms race, and we still want it, and we want people to keep working hard on it. It's a tough problem, and we need it. So I kind of leaning toward thinking that AI text classification is like that. It's a tough problem. We've only just started trying different approaches to it. And we're gonna need it in our toolbox. There are various approaches that researchers are trying to improve the accuracy and to make it, harder to evade with paraphrasing. So OpenAI is working on watermarking text, and that's not visual. It's actually like a statistical pattern in how the words are chosen that's not visible to the user, but that could be detected by a detector that has the key to it. The other approach is just simply to keep a database. What if OpenAI had to keep a database of everything that ChatGPT had ever generated? And if people need to know if something was generated, we could check. They're also working on paraphrase detection. Thanks for the warning, 5 minutes. So there may be a way to detect even if something has been paraphrased with Quillbot. Here's a paper on that paraphrase detection. And of course, Turnitin is developing that, but they want to charge more for it. Another reason not to give up on detectors is just that some students are asking for them. I think this is a Boston University class that developed a policy for AI use that was then adopted by the data science department. And they called for using detectors for students to have access to them and instructors as well. And they wanted that in order to ensure sort of a competitive fairness, that students could choose how much to use AI, but that that detectors would sort of enforce that. So, and some folks are concerned that maybe sometimes students are more strict because they've kind of heard that they should be. But I would say we can't assume that. I mean, if they're saying they want detectors, we should really think about that. So I do see a possibility for detection as deterrent, just to send this sort of basic message that no one should assume that AI text is undetectable or that it's private if we use it. What's not detectable now might become detectable in 5 years. And that's something that we should be open with students about. We can even share that, I share that I've been tempted to use it and then thought, oh, but I don't really want to label it as AI. So if you don't want people to know you're using it, then you really shouldn't be using it. So I'm seeing this role for transparency and using classification software, if it were freely available to everyone, maybe students could use it before they submit their essay, so there's not that fear of, will my work be flagged? I won't know. And maybe government can support the development of this, offer a prize or incentive for developing better classification techniques, or require companies to keep a database of outputs, ban software like undetectable.ai that is basically designed to help people pass off AI text as human. Maybe it can help us maintain a space for the human in textual communication, promote our awareness of our own agency as writers. When is it our voice and when is it the AI, to help us keep that clear in our own minds and to help us reflect on how we're using it. So that's where I am at the moment, and I've run out of time almost, but there are 7 minutes. So, okay, so we have a little time, and I would love to know where folks are. Folks want to push back, that would be great. I can also share, this is the resource list that I curate, and there is a section on there on detectors with lots of links to specific detectors and articles about detection as well. So that is my presentation, and I would love to know what questions and responses you have. Yeah, I try to keep a balance of idealism and realism. Thank you for that, witnessing that, to Margaret Christian. Definitely concerned also about climate change impact of the AI. Yep, that's a big one. Let's see. Nobody wants to push back and say, I hate detectors. They are only evil. Yeah, and thank you, Thomas Bosbell, talking about pushing back on the idea of using in-class writing, and that a lot of writing competence can be demonstrated in 3 hours and 1,000 words. So yeah, we should keep having that discussion. How much can be, and how long do they need to write? How long of an essay do they need to write? I'm surprised I'm not getting more people up in arms, because I just heard so much of the sort of like, I don't want to police my students. But okay, thanks, Liza Long. Yeah, absolutely. And I think learning to write with this tool will be an important transferable skill. I guess the case I'm trying to make is that detection classification is actually important if we want to exclude AI and if we want to embrace it. So if we want to teach its use, we still need to know, especially as students get more familiar with it and it's more integrated, we're teaching how to prompt, but what if the prompts are also written by ChatGPT? So it seems like maybe even if we're embracing it in a way, we have even more need to still know what is the students and what is the AI. Yeah, so it's kind of amazing how even, yeah, I love that anecdote of uh, having a conversation with a student, and when he shared his screen, there was a tab open with something like, my teacher accused me of using ChatGPT, strategies for, he was coming up with strategies for defending himself. What was that, using ChatGPT or just Googling it? Either way, yeah, it's, I've heard anecdotes. On one hand, I hear, don't assume that students are using it or that they want to use it. But on the other hand, I hear, yes, they are using it. So I'm trying to keep kind of an open mind on that. And it's true, using the detectors might be inviting academic stress. Yeah, that's true. And that is the thing that kind of gives me the most pause. That's why I would want, and Turnitin does not allow teachers or institutions to let students see their AI likelihood score before they turn an essay in. And I think they should change that. I think they should let us decide whether or not we want to give students access to that. Sure, it could be used to game the system and keep tweaking it until it passes the test. But I think it's important to say, okay, there are these tools online, and we trust and respect you and want to help you distinguish human and AI and reflect on the difference. And so why not let the student use the detector themselves, or maybe even ask them to use it and reflect on the result, and be very open that there are false positives, remove the punitive, right? So even the way I use Turnitin with plagiarism is to say, is basically just to let them rewrite. So I would do that with this too. Yeah. Turnitin itself uses AI, that's true. I'm just looking at the chat. Were there any in-person questions? Right, I mean, it's going to be integrated into Word, and it's going to be part of their future, the writing environment in their future jobs. But I would also argue that a lot of the skills that we're teaching are exactly the skills that they need to prompt it well. And we were already teaching a lot of those skills in teaching rhetoric, and in teaching subject matter material, right? So in order to get the most on a particular subject, if you need to have expertise in that subject. So maintaining that space where there's still something they're doing that's not with the AI, or that is their own words, that we keep a space for the human, is essential even to teaching them to develop that kind of skill. And I love the connections that both Mahabali and Jeremy Douglas made between prompt engineering and rhetoric, and the sense that maybe they don't need, you don't need to code to do prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is not necessarily technical. It may be what we're already teaching in our classes. Yeah, writing needs cultivating in the early learning years. Yeah, I'm not ready for my kids to use ChatGPT. I don't think it's a great idea. Eventually, sure, they will, but I'm not convinced that using it now is what they need in order to be good users of AI in 10 years or in 5 years. Certainly, any specific tips and tricks that apply to ChatGPT now might be way out of date in a couple of years. It seems like it will get less technical as the systems themselves are sophisticated about the technical stuff so that they can interact with us in natural language, right? So I know we're at time and I want to be respectful of that, but I also totally open to hang out and have more questions, or comments or more pushback. Let's see. Feel free to get in touch on email or on Twitter. And with that, I will stop. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I so appreciate seeing other familiar names from Twitter discussions. Roxanne Riskin. It's great to be seeing the connections between all the different forms of conversation we're having on this. And let's keep going on the Discord and on social media. Because yeah, I definitely have not figured this out, but hoping we can still have space for text as meaningful human communication. And that's the goal here for me. Thank you so much for coming.